In the dying light of a forgotten star system, where alien empires had written off entire worlds as lost causes, a single human technician would prove that sometimes the most advanced civilizations overlook the simplest solutions. When Marcus Chen stepped aboard the legendary starship Lumina Eternal, he had no idea that his calloused hands and stubborn refusal to accept impossible would reignite not just a vessel's heart, but the hope of an entire galaxy. What the greatest minds of 3 different species couldn't accomplish in decades, one human with a toolkit and an unshakable belief that everything can be fixed was about to achieve in ways that would reshape the understanding of both technology and the indomitable human spirit. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared up at the massive hulk before him, floating dead in space like a metal cathedral built by gods and abandoned by time. The Lumina Eternal stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, her hull gleaming with an otherworldly iridescence that seemed to capture and hold starlight even in the void. But, for all her beauty, she was as lifeless as a tomb. "Magnificent, isn't she?" came a melodic voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Zara Th approaching, her crystalline features catching the light from the observation deck's windows. The Veltar engineer's 6 arms moved in complex patterns as she spoke, a sign of deep emotion among her kind. "My people called her the crown jewel of the fleet. 30 years ago, she was the fastest ship in known space, capable of crossing entire star systems in the time it takes other vessels to clear a planet's gravity well." Marcus nodded, still studying the ship's elegant lines. Everything about her spoke of advanced engineering far beyond current human capabilities. The hull itself seemed to be grown rather than built, flowing in organic curves that somehow managed to look both beautiful and functional. Crystalline formations jutted from various points along her surface, dark now but clearly designed to channel some form of energy. "What happened to her?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. He'd been called in because 3 different species had failed to bring her back online. The Veltar with their crystalline technology, the massive Kron with their brute force engineering, and the ethereal Psykar with their energy manipulation abilities. All had tried and failed. Zara Th's arms drooped slightly. The Starlight drive simply stopped. Not gradually, not with warning signs we could interpret. One moment she was the pride of our fleet, the next she was drifting powerless. We've had our best minds working on her for 3 decades. The Kron brought their most powerful reactors to try to jumpstart her systems. The Psykar attempted to commune with whatever intelligence might remain in her quantum matrices. "And now you're trying a human," Marcus said with a wry smile. "I'm guessing I'm not your first choice." "Actually," Zara Th said, her voice taking on a note of genuine curiosity, "you might be exactly what we need. Your species has a reputation for unconventional solutions. The Galactic Engineering Council calls humans the species that fixes things that shouldn't be fixable." Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, we get that a lot. My grandfather used to say that humans don't know when to quit, which makes us either very stupid or very dangerous, depending on the situation. In this case, perhaps both qualities are required." The shuttle bay of the Lumina Eternal was a study in contradictions. The basic structure was clearly functional, designed to accommodate vessels of various sizes and configurations. But the details spoke of artistry that went beyond mere engineering. The walls seemed to pulse with faint veins of light, currently dormant but suggesting a level of integration between the ship's systems that Marcus had never seen before. "The ship is still structurally sound," Zara Th explained as they walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. "Life support is maintained by auxiliary systems we installed. But the primary power grid, the navigation systems, even the basic computer networks are completely unresponsive. It's as if the ship's soul has simply departed." Marcus ran his hand along one of the walls, feeling the strange warmth that emanated from the surface despite the ship's dormant state. "You keep talking about her like she's alive. Because she is, in a way." Zara Th stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall, but, as she approached, a doorway irised opened silently. "The Veltar don't build ships the way other species do. We grow them, nurture them, form a symbiotic relationship with their quantum consciousness. The Lumina Eternal was our greatest achievement in biotechnological integration." They entered what was clearly the ship's heart, a vast chamber dominated by a crystalline formation that rose from floor to ceiling like a frozen waterfall. The crystal was easily 30 meters tall, multifaceted and beautiful, but completely dark. Around it, banks of instruments and control surfaces waited silent and powerless. "This is the Starlight Drive Core," Zareth said softly. "It doesn't just propel the ship through space. It harmonizes with stellar radiation across multiple dimensional frequencies, converting pure starlight into a form of energy that transcends conventional physics. At full power, the Lumina Eternal could travel distances that would take other ships months to cover." Marcus approached the crystal formation slowly, his engineer's eye taking in every detail. Unlike human technology with its clear mechanical interfaces and obvious connection points, this seemed to be a single, seamless whole. "How do you interface with it?" "I don't see any control panels, any input devices. The Veltar connect directly through bioneural links," Zareth explained, touching a spot behind her head where Marcus could see faint crystalline implants. "But the ship has been unresponsive to our attempts for decades. We've tried every frequency, every harmonic combination our best engineers could devise." "And the other species?" "The Kron attempted to brute force a connection using massive energy transfers. They nearly destabilized the core's quantum matrix before we stopped them. The Psychar tried to reach whatever consciousness might remain through telepathic resonance, but they reported only silence." Marcus set down his toolkit and began unpacking instruments that looked primitive compared to the elegant technology surrounding them. Multimeters, oscilloscopes, even a basic hammer that seemed almost comically crude in this environment. "What exactly are you planning to do?" Zareth asked, watching with fascination as Marcus began taking readings from various points around the crystal. "Same thing I always do," Marcus replied, not looking up from his instruments. "Figure out how it works, figure out what's broken, and fix it." He paused, studying a reading that didn't make sense. "Your people, the Veltar, you said you grow your ships. Does that mean this core is biological?" "Biotechnological," Zareth corrected. "It exists in a state between organic life and crystalline matrix. The consciousness that emerges from this hybrid state is what allows the ship to process and channel starlight in ways that pure technology cannot achieve." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand. "So it's not just a machine that broke down. It's a living system that went into some kind of dormancy or shock state." He looked up at the massive crystal, his mind racing through possibilities. In human medicine, when someone goes into a coma, sometimes the problem isn't that their brain is damaged. Sometimes they just need the right stimulus to wake up. "We've tried every form of stimulation our science can provide," Zareth said. "The core shows no response to any input." "But you've been trying to wake it up using Veltar methods, Kron methods, Psychar methods," Marcus said, a grin spreading across his face. "Has anyone tried human methods?" Before Zareth could ask what he meant, Marcus was already moving toward one of the auxiliary power conduits he'd spotted earlier. His toolkit contained items that would have been familiar to any human engineer, tools that represented thousands of years of human problem-solving evolution. Simple, direct, effective. "What are you doing?" Zareth asked, alarm creeping into her voice as Marcus began connecting leads from his equipment to what appeared to be a power distribution node. "Every electrical system, no matter how advanced, operates on certain basic principles," Marcus explained, checking his connections carefully. "Current flows from high potential to low potential. Resistance creates heat. And, sometimes, when a system has been dormant for a long time, it just needs a good old-fashioned kick in the pants to get started." "A kick in the pants?" "Sorry, human expression. I mean it needs a sudden, unexpected input to shock it back to awareness." Marcus finished his connections and stepped back to check his work. "Your people have been trying to gently coax this system back to life using its own internal protocols. But, sometimes, when something's been asleep too long, you need to be a little less polite about waking it up." The device Marcus had rigged was essentially a massive electrical pulse generator, capable of delivering a precisely timed surge of power that would be completely outside the normal parameters of Veltar technology. It was crude, direct, and exactly the kind of approach that had made humans notorious throughout the galaxy for succeeding where more sophisticated species failed. "This could damage the core irreparably," Zareth warned, but Marcus detected curiosity rather than genuine concern in her voice. "Could," Marcus agreed, making final adjustments to his improvised device. "But leaving it dormant isn't exactly working either." sometimes you have to take risks to get results. He looked up at the crystal formation one more time, noting how its faceted surface seemed to be waiting, expectant. There was something about the way the light played across its surface that reminded him of morning frost on a window, beautiful but temporary, just waiting for the right moment to transform. "Stand back," Marcus said, his hand hovering over the activation switch. "This is either going to work spectacularly or fail in ways that'll give us both nightmares." Zara-Th moved to what she considered a safe distance, though given the scale of the forces they were dealing with, Marcus wasn't sure there was such a thing as a truly safe distance in the core chamber. "Just so I understand," Zara-Th called out, "your plan is to apply a massive electrical shock to a biotechnological system that 3 advanced civilizations have been unable to revive?" "Pretty much," Marcus called back. "In my experience, sometimes the simplest approach is the right approach. We're just going to ring the doorbell really, really loudly." He threw the switch. The pulse that erupted from Marcus's device was nothing compared to the response it triggered. The entire crystal formation blazed to life instantly, flooding the core chamber with light so brilliant that both Marcus and Zara-Th had to shield their eyes. But this wasn't the harsh glare of artificial illumination. This was living light, warm and organic, that seemed to reach out and embrace everything it touched. The sound that accompanied the awakening was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. It was part harmonic resonance, part organic growth, and part something that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and speak directly to his consciousness. The crystal sang, a wordless song of joy and renewed purpose that made his chest tight with emotion he couldn't quite identify. "By the eternal void," Zara-Th whispered, her arms spread wide in an expression of pure wonder. "She's awakening." The light from the crystal core began to spread throughout the ship's systems like blood returning to a body that had been on the verge of death. Conduits that had been dark for 30 years began to glow with soft, pulsing illumination. Displays flickered to life, showing readouts in languages that shifted and changed as the ship's consciousness reacquainted itself with its surroundings. Marcus felt a presence touch his mind, gentle and questioning, like a vast intelligence carefully examining this small being who had dared to wake it from its long sleep. The sensation was overwhelming and intimate at the same time, as if the ship itself was trying to understand what he was and why he was here. "She's scanning you," Zara-Th said, her voice full of awe. "The ship's consciousness is trying to understand who woke her up." Marcus stood perfectly still, letting the alien intelligence examine him. He could feel it probing not just his thoughts but his intentions, his nature, his species' particular approach to problems and solutions. It was like being read by a mind so vast and ancient that his own consciousness felt like a flickering candle in comparison. Then, slowly, he felt something that could only be described as amusement. The ship's consciousness had found something about him, about humans in general, that it found not just interesting but delightfully unexpected. The presence in his mind carried a sense of recognition, as if it had been waiting not just to wake up, but to meet the particular kind of being who would wake it up in such an unconventional way. The light from the core stabilized into a steady, warm glow that filled the chamber with an ambience that was somehow both technological and organic. Systems throughout the ship continued to come online, but at a measured pace, like a sleeper gradually returning to full consciousness. "Status report," Marcus said, grinning as he began shutting down his improvised wake-up device. "How do we look?" Displays around the chamber flickered with information in scripts that flowed and changed, but Zara-Th seemed able to read them. "Primary systems are initializing. Power distribution networks are operating at 87% efficiency and climbing. Navigation systems are, by the void, Marcus, she's already calculating stellar positions and plotting courses to 17 different destinations." "Sounds like she's feeling better," Marcus said, packing up his equipment with the satisfaction of a job well done. "How long before she's fully operational?" "If the current rate of system restoration continues," Zara-Th said, consulting displays that were now showing complex charts and diagrams, "the Lumina Eternal will be ready for initial flight operations within 6 hours." Marcus paused in his packing. 6 hours? Your people said she'd been down for 30 years. She had been. But you didn't just restart her systems, Marcus. You reminded her why she wanted to fly in the first place. Zara-Th approached the crystal core, which now pulsed with gentle light that seemed to respond to her presence. The ship's consciousness had withdrawn from her physical systems not because of mechanical failure, but because she had lost her sense of purpose. She was despondent. A depressed spaceship, Marcus said, shaking his head in wonder. That's a new one, even for me. The Lumina Eternal was built not just to travel between stars, but to explore, to discover, to push the boundaries of what was possible. When the wars began, when her missions became routine patrol routes and cargo runs, she simply gave up. Withdrew into herself. Marcus looked up at the crystal core, which seemed to be looking back at him with something like gratitude. So what changed? What made her decide to wake up? Zareth's arms moved in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought among her people. I think she recognized something in you, in the way you approached her problem. Humans don't accept that something is impossible just because conventional wisdom says it is. You brought her the one thing she'd been missing. Which was hope, Zareth said simply. The belief that any problem can be solved if you're willing to try hard enough and think differently enough. It's a very human quality. As if in response to their conversation, the ship's consciousness touched Marcus's mind again, and, this time the sensation was unmistakably one of gratitude and anticipation. The Lumina Eternal was awake, she was healing, and she was ready to remember what it felt like to dance between the stars. Marcus shouldered his toolkit and headed toward the chamber's exit, which now opened before him automatically. Well then, he said, grinning back at Zareth, I guess we'd better figure out where she wants to go. 6 hours later, Marcus found himself standing on the bridge of the Lumina Eternal, watching in fascination as systems he barely understood came alive around him. The bridge wasn't like anything he'd seen on human vessels, with their banks of screens and mechanical controls. Instead, it seemed to be a living space that responded to thought and intention as much as to direct commands. The command chair, if it could be called that, was more like a crystalline throne that seemed to grow from the deck itself. Around it, holographic displays showed star charts, system diagnostics, and what appeared to be streaming feeds from sensors throughout the ship. But these weren't static displays. They moved and flowed like living things, responding to the observer's focus and interest. She's beautiful when she's alive, isn't she? Zareth said, moving gracefully between display nodes that seemed to bloom into existence wherever she needed them. I haven't seen her like this since I was a youngster, barely out of the engineering academies. Marcus nodded, still trying to process what he was seeing. How do you even operate something like this? I don't see any controls in the traditional sense. The Veltar interface directly with our ships through bioneural links, Zareth explained, touching the crystalline implants behind her head. But the Lumina Eternal was designed to be more flexible than most of our vessels. She can accommodate other forms of consciousness, other ways of thinking. As if responding to their conversation, a section of the bridge near Marcus began to shift and change. The organic curves of Veltar design flowed into more angular, mechanical-looking forms. Displays that had been floating holograms solidified into physical screens, and what appeared to be a traditional control console emerged from the deck. Well, that's new, Zareth said, her arms moving in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated surprise among her people. She's creating an interface specifically for you. Marcus approached the improvised human-style control station cautiously. The screens showed readouts in languages that were almost familiar, as if the ship's consciousness was adapting human technological conventions to its own purposes. He could see power distribution diagrams, navigation plots, and what appeared to be a real-time analysis of the ship's condition. Everything looks good from here, he said, studying the displays with growing confidence. Power systems are stable, navigation is online, and, according to this readout, the Starlight drive is operating at 93% efficiency. Which is remarkable, considering she was completely dormant 12 hours ago, Zareth added. The Lumina Eternal is not just recovering, she's improving herself. Her systems are more integrated now than they were before the shutdown. A soft chime drew their attention to the main display, where a new star chart had appeared. Unlike the static navigation charts Marcus was used to, this one seemed alive with possibility. Stellar positions pulsed with different colors and intensities, and lines of potential travel routes drew themselves across the display like luminous threads connecting distant points of light. She's showing us destinations, Zareth said, studying the display with the expertise of someone who had spent decades working with Veltar navigation systems. These aren't random locations. Each of these systems represents something significant. Marcus looked more closely at the chart. Significant how? Before Zarath could answer, the ship's consciousness touched both their minds simultaneously. The sensation was less intrusive this time, more like a gentle invitation to share understanding. Images flowed through Marcus's awareness, distant worlds shrouded in mystery, ancient structures that defied conventional physics, regions of space where starlight behaved in ways that challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about reality. She wants to explore, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. These are all places that the major powers have written off as too dangerous, too strange, or too far away to bother with. The Outer Rim territories, Zarath confirmed. The forgotten systems where phenomena occur that our science cannot explain. The Lumina Eternal was originally designed for missions like this, before the bureaucrats decided she was too valuable to risk on speculative ventures. Marcus felt a familiar thrill, the same excitement he'd experienced as a child taking apart broken devices just to see how they worked. Here was a ship that didn't just travel through space, but could potentially unlock mysteries that had puzzled the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries. "What's stopping us?" he asked. Zarath's arms moved in what Marcus had learned was the Veltar equivalent of a nervous laugh. The Galactic Engineering Council, the Fleet Command, the entire bureaucratic structure that's grown up around deep space exploration. They've been trying to get the Lumina Eternal operational again for 30 years, but only so they can use her for conventional missions. If they knew she was awake and asking to visit forbidden territories, they'd probably want to study her to death instead of letting her do what she was designed for, Marcus finished. Yeah, we've got the same problem with human institutions. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just go ahead and do what needs doing, then apologize later if anyone complains. The main display shifted, showing what appeared to be a real-time view of local space. The Lumina Eternal was currently docked at a research station that orbited a dying star, a place where decommissioned vessels came to wait for either restoration or scrapping. But the ship's sensors were already reaching out, tasting the stellar winds and calculating jump coordinates. She wants to leave, Marcus said, reading the subtle signs in the ship's behavior. She's been patient while we figured things out, but she's ready to stretch her legs. The station commander will never authorize an unscheduled departure, Zarath said. And even if he did, we'd need a full crew to operate a ship this size safely. Marcus grinned, the expression that had gotten him into and out of trouble throughout his career. Well, first problem first. Let me talk to the station commander. 20 minutes later, Marcus was facing a very unhappy Kron officer whose massive frame barely fit behind his desk. Commander Thakgol was built like a walking mountain, with the kind of presence that could intimidate entire crews without saying a word. But Marcus had dealt with difficult supervisors before, and he'd learned that sometimes the direct approach worked better than diplomacy. "You want to take the Lumina Eternal for a test flight," Thakgol rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "A ship that's been dormant for 30 years, with a crew of exactly 2 beings, one of whom is a human technician with no formal command training." "That's about the size of it," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "Though I prefer to think of it as returning a fully restored vessel to active service under the guidance of beings who actually understand how she works. The ship has not undergone proper certification protocols. There have been no systems integration tests, no crew qualification assessments, no flight plan approvals." Thakgol's fists, each the size of Marcus's head, clenched on the desk surface. "What you're requesting is not just irregular, it's completely outside established procedures." "Commander," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly, with respect, "your established procedures have had 30 years to get this ship operational, and they've accomplished exactly nothing. In 12 hours, using methods that probably violate half the regulations in your manual, we've got her not just running but eager to fly. Sometimes you have to choose between following procedures and getting results." Thakgol's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught something that might have been approval in the Kron officer's eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. "But I'm also right. That ship out there isn't just another vessel waiting for bureaucratic approval. She's a living entity that's been caged for 3 decades, and she's asking for the chance to do what she was born to do. Are you going to be the one to tell her no?" For a long moment, Thakjiol stared at Marcus with the kind of intensity that had probably made junior officers reconsider their career choices. Then, slowly, the massive Kron reached for his authorization pad. "I am approving a limited test flight," he growled, his stylus moving across the surface with surprising delicacy for such massive hands. Duration, 72 hours maximum. Operational area, local system only. Any deviation from approved parameters will result in immediate recall and detention. Marcus accepted the authorization pad with barely contained excitement. "Thank you, Commander. You won't regret this." "I already regret this," Thakjiol replied dryly. "But, in 40 years of service, I've learned to recognize when something important is happening, even if I don't fully understand it. That ship has been dead for longer than some species have had spaceflight. If you can bring her truly back to life, then perhaps some rules are worth bending." An hour later, Marcus was back on the bridge, watching as the Lumina Eternal gracefully disengaged from the research station's docking clamps. The ship moved with an organic fluidity that was unlike anything he'd experienced on human vessels, as if she were swimming through space rather than being pushed by conventional propulsion. "She's happy," Zara-TH observed, monitoring system readouts that painted the bridge in soft, welcoming light. "Her quantum consciousness is more active now than I've ever seen it. It's like watching someone wake up from a long illness and remember what it feels like to be healthy." Marcus settled into the hybrid control station the ship had created for him, marveling at how intuitive the interface felt. The displays responded to his thoughts almost before he had them, anticipating his needs and presenting information in ways that made sense to his human way of processing data. "Navigation is showing green across the board," he reported. "Starlight Drive is operating at full efficiency. And, according to this sensor array, she's already cataloging stellar phenomena in the local system that nobody's noticed before." The main display showed their current position relative to the dying star that anchored this forgotten corner of space. But, where conventional sensors might show only a cooling stellar remnant, the Lumina Eternal's enhanced perception was revealing layers of reality that existed beyond normal electromagnetic spectra. "Look at this," Zara-TH said, calling up a sensor feed that made Marcus's breath catch. The dying star wasn't just cooling. It was transforming, its stellar matter taking on patterns and structures that suggested intelligence, purpose, design. "She's seeing something here that our instruments never detected." "What are we looking at?" Marcus asked, studying the display with growing wonder. "I'm not entirely sure," Zara-TH admitted. "But, if the readings are accurate, that star isn't dying naturally. Something is harvesting its energy, converting it into forms that don't show up on conventional sensors." The ship's consciousness touched both their minds again, sharing impressions of vast intelligences that existed on scales beyond normal comprehension. Entities that fed on starlight itself, transforming the death of one star into the birth of something new and strange. "She wants to investigate," Marcus said, understanding the ship's desire as clearly as if she had spoken aloud. "This is exactly the kind of phenomenon she was designed to study." "But, our authorization only covers local system operations," Zara-TH pointed out. "Getting close enough to conduct a proper investigation would require entering zones that the Galactic Survey has classified as potentially hazardous." Marcus looked at the display showing the mysterious transformations occurring within the dying star, then, at the star charts indicating other phenomena throughout the galaxy that waited for someone brave enough to investigate them. The Lumina Eternal had awakened not just to fly, but to explore, to push boundaries, to seek out the unknown. "Zara-TH," he said finally, "what's the worst thing that could happen if we accidentally exceeded our authorized operating area while conducting important scientific observations?" The Veltar engineer's arms moved in patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as her version of a mischievous smile. "We could be reprimanded, disciplined, or even banned from future deep space operations." "And what's the best thing that could happen?" "We could discover something that changes our understanding of the universe itself." Marcus nodded, his decision made. "Then, let's go see what's really going on inside that star. After all, we're supposed to be conducting a test flight. How can we properly test the ship's capabilities if we don't push her to her limits?" The Lumina Eternal seemed to sense their decision, and Marcus felt a surge of joy from the ship's consciousness that was almost overwhelming. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had been dreaming of during her long dormancy. Not just the chance to fly again, but the opportunity to do what she had been born to do, explore the impossible and make it real. Setting course for close approach to stellar phenomena, Zara-TH announced, her hands dancing across control surfaces that appeared and disappeared as needed. The ship's consciousness is already calculating optimal observation angles and protective field configurations. Time to contact? Marcus asked, settling into his station with the kind of anticipation he hadn't felt since he was a child about to take apart his first broken machine. 18 minutes at current approach speed, Zara-TH replied. Marcus, are you sure about this? What we're about to attempt goes against everything the Galactic Engineering Council considers safe practice. Marcus grinned, watching as the Lumina Eternal gracefully changed course toward the dying star and its mysterious transformations. Zara-TH, in my experience, anything worth doing is probably going to violate someone's idea of safe practice. Besides, we've got the best ship in the galaxy and a mystery that's been waiting centuries for someone to solve it. How could we possibly pass that up? The ship sang around them, her consciousness bright with anticipation as she carried them toward the unknown. And, for the first time in 30 years, the Lumina Eternal remembered what it felt like to truly fly. As the Lumina Eternal approached the dying star, Marcus watched the main display with growing amazement. What had appeared to be a simple cooling stellar remnant from a distance was revealing itself to be something far more complex and beautiful. The star's surface writhed with patterns that seemed almost organic, great spirals and geometric forms that shifted and evolved as he watched. The readings are incredible, Zara-TH said, her 6 arms working simultaneously across multiple control surfaces. The stellar matter isn't just cooling randomly. It's being organized, structured, transformed into something that's part matter and part energy. Marcus studied the sensor feeds streaming across his improvised human interface. It's like watching someone build something, but on a scale so massive we can barely comprehend it. What could possibly have the power to reshape an entire star? Before Zara-TH could answer, the ship's consciousness touched their minds with a flood of information so intense that Marcus had to grip his chair to keep from being overwhelmed. Images flooded his awareness, vast intelligences that existed in the spaces between dimensions, entities so ancient that they had watched galaxies form and evolve and die, beings that fed on the life force of stars themselves but transformed that energy into something new and wonderful. The architects, Zara-TH whispered, her crystalline features pale with awe. They're real. The Lumina Eternal is detecting the presence of the architects. Who are the architects? Marcus managed to ask, though part of his mind was still processing the incredible images the ship had shared. Legends, Zara-TH said, though her tone suggested she was rapidly reassessing that classification. Stories told by the oldest species in the galaxy about beings who shaped reality itself in the early epochs after the universe began to cool. Most scholars consider them mythology, stories invented to explain phenomena we didn't understand. The main display shifted, showing a 3-dimensional representation of the space around the dying star. But this wasn't just normal space. The Lumina Eternal's enhanced sensors were revealing layers of reality that existed beyond conventional physics, dimensions where energy and matter followed rules that no galactic civilization had ever discovered. Look at this, Marcus said, highlighting a section of the display where the boundaries between dimensions seemed to be fluctuating. It's like reality itself is being rewritten here. The normal laws of physics are suggestions rather than absolute rules. That's exactly what it is, Zara-TH confirmed, studying readouts that would have been impossible for conventional sensors to detect. The architects aren't just harvesting the star's energy. They're using it to create a localized region where the fundamental constants of reality can be adjusted, modified, improved. The ship's consciousness reached out to them again, this time with a sense of urgency. The Lumina Eternal had detected something approaching from deeper in the stellar transformation zone, something massive and ancient and alive. Contact, Marcus announced, watching as a new signature appeared on the tactical display. Range approximately 50,000 kilometers and closing. Configuration unknown. What emerged from the star's writhing surface was like nothing in any database of known vessels. It wasn't built so much as grown, a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Parts of it appeared solid and real, while other sections flickered in and out of visible reality as if they existed primarily in spaces that normal matter couldn't access. It's beautiful, Zara Th breathed, and Marcus had to agree. The approaching entity combined the organic elegance of Veltar biotechnology with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the mind couldn't quite process shapes that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Are they hostile? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure how conventional weapons could affect something that seemed to phase in and out of normal reality. The ship's consciousness touched their minds with impressions of vast curiosity and cautious welcome. The architects, it seemed, were as surprised to encounter the Lumina Eternal as Marcus and Zara Th were to find them. But there was no sense of threat, only an ancient intelligence wondering what these small beings were doing in its cosmic workshop. They're scanning us, Zara Th reported, watching as energy patterns float across the ship's hull. But it's not an aggressive probe. It's more like they're trying to understand what we are. Marcus felt the alien consciousness brush against his mind, and the sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced. Where the Lumina Eternal's consciousness felt warm and curious, this presence was vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond measure, and filled with a patience that came from having watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. Images flowed through his awareness, the universe in its infancy, when matter was still learning how to organize itself into complex patterns, the first stars burning themselves into existence and beginning the long process of creating the elements that would one day become planets and life, the gradual emergence of consciousness from the quantum foam that underlied all reality. They're trying to communicate, Marcus realized, though communication seemed like an inadequate word for the exchange of pure understanding that was occurring. They want to know how we found them, what we're doing here. The ship's consciousness served as a translator, taking the architect's concepts and rendering them in forms that human and Veltar minds could process. The message that emerged was simple and profound: why do you seek the paths between realities? Marcus looked at Zara Th, who was clearly experiencing the same overwhelming contact with an intelligence that existed on scales they had never imagined. How do we answer something like that? Honestly, Zara Th said, her voice filled with wonder. We tell them the truth. Speaking through the ship's consciousness, Marcus projected his response toward the alien entity. We seek to understand. We want to learn about the universe and our place in it. We believe that knowledge and discovery make existence meaningful. The pause that followed lasted only seconds in real time, but felt like an eternity as the architect considered their response. When the answer came, it carried amusement and approval that felt like sunlight after a long winter. You are young, but you ask the right questions. Come. See what we build with the songs of dying stars. The crystalline entity began to move back toward the stellar transformation zone, clearly expecting the Lumina Eternal to follow. Marcus looked at Zara Th, who nodded without hesitation. This is what the ship was designed for, she said. This is why she wanted to wake up. The journey into the star's transformed interior was like diving through layers of reality itself. Normal space gave way to regions where the fundamental forces operated according to different rules, where light bent in impossible directions and distance became more of a suggestion than an absolute measurement. The Lumina Eternal handled the transition flawlessly, her consciousness adapting to each new layer of reality as if she had been designed for exactly this purpose. Which, Marcus realized, she probably had been. The Veltar who had grown this ship had somehow anticipated the need for a vessel that could navigate spaces where normal physics broke down. The energy readings are off any scale I've ever seen, Zara Th reported, monitoring displays that showed forces at work that conventional science couldn't explain. But the ship is handling everything perfectly. It's as if she recognizes this environment. They emerged into a space that defied description. It was simultaneously vast and intimate, filled with structures that were part architecture and part living entity. Crystalline formations grew and evolved as they watched, shaped by forces that turned stellar matter into forms of beauty that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. This is what they do, he whispered, understanding flooding through him. They don't destroy stars. They transform them into something new, something that exists as both matter and consciousness and pure artistry. The architect's vessel led them through galleries of impossible beauty, past structures that sang with harmonies that existed beyond sound and into spaces where the boundaries between thought and reality had been dissolved entirely. Here, in the heart of a transformed star, the architects pursued their cosmic artistry on scales that dwarfed anything the galaxy's civilizations had ever attempted. They're gardeners, Zara Th said, her voice full of awe. They tend the universe itself, helping it grow and evolve and become something more beautiful than it could achieve on its own. As they traveled deeper into the stellar transformation, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they were seeing. This wasn't just one architect working alone. This was a community, a civilization that existed across multiple dimensions and operated on timescales that made geological epochs seem like brief moments. The ship's consciousness was practically vibrating with joy, drinking in information about forms of existence that she had only dreamed of. This was what she had been created to find, what she had been waiting 30 years to discover. "They're offering to teach us," Zara-Th said suddenly, her arms moving in patterns of excitement and disbelief. "The architects are offering to share some of their knowledge, to show us how to perceive reality the way they do." Marcus felt the offer touch his mind like a gentle invitation. The knowledge being offered was vast, complex, and would fundamentally change how he understood the universe. But it was also exactly what humanity had always sought, the chance to learn, to grow, to become something more than they had been before. "What's the cost?" he asked, because his experience had taught him that anything worthwhile usually came with a price. The answer came not in words but in understanding. The cost was change itself. To accept the architect's knowledge meant accepting that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any galactic civilization had imagined. It meant abandoning the comfortable certainty that current scientific understanding represented the ultimate truth about reality. "They want us to be ambassadors," Zara-Th realized. "They want us to carry their knowledge back to the galactic community, to help prepare other species for contact with forms of existence they never knew were possible." Marcus looked around at the impossible beauty surrounding them, at the evidence of intelligences that could reshape reality itself through will and artistry and patience beyond measure. The human part of him that had always believed anything could be fixed, could be improved, could be made better, recognized kindred spirits in these ancient cosmic gardeners. "Then, that's what we'll do," he said, making the decision that would change not just his life but the future of galactic civilization. "We'll learn what they have to teach us, and we'll find a way to share it with everyone who's ready to listen." The Lumina Eternal sang around them, her consciousness blazing with joy and purpose as she prepared to become the bridge between two completely different forms of existence. This was what she had been created for, what she had been waiting her entire existence to accomplish. The architect's vessel approached them slowly, and Marcus felt the ancient intelligence reaching out with something that could only be described as gratitude. For eons, they had worked in isolation, pursuing their cosmic artistry without contact with the younger species that filled the galaxy. But now, finally, they had found beings who could appreciate what they were doing, who could help them share the wonder of their work with a universe that was ready to evolve beyond its current limitations. As the formal exchange of knowledge began, Marcus realized that their little unauthorized test flight had become something far more significant. They weren't just exploring anymore. They were about to become the catalysts for the next great leap in galactic civilization. And, somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but grin at the thought of Commander Thakjoel's expression when he filed his mission report. The knowledge transfer was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Where human learning involved gradual accumulation of facts and concepts, what the architects offered was direct understanding, complete conceptual frameworks that bloomed in his consciousness like flowers opening to sunlight. Through the ship's consciousness, which served as a buffer and translator for minds too small to safely interface directly with such vast intelligences, Marcus found himself understanding principles that human science hadn't even begun to suspect. Reality wasn't fixed and immutable as his species had always assumed. It was fluid, responsive, capable of being shaped by consciousness itself when properly applied. "The dimensional mathematics are incredible," Zara-Th whispered, her crystalline features glowing as her own mind processed the influx of knowledge. "They're showing us how space and time can be folded, twisted, reshaped to create passages between points that are theoretically impossible to connect." Marcus watched displays that showed the universe not as a single continuous spacetime manifold, but as a complex network of overlapping realities, each with its own physical laws and constants. The architects moved between these realities like gardeners tending different plots, nurturing the growth and evolution of consciousness wherever they found it. "This explains so much," he said, studying representations of phenomena that the galactic community had written off as impossible or supernatural. The ghost ships that appear in regions where no vessel should be able to survive, the planets that exist in stable orbits around stars that shouldn't be able to support them, the energy signatures that don't match any known form of matter or radiation. All evidence of architect activity, Zara-TH agreed. They've been working throughout the galaxy for millions of years, but so subtly that we never recognized their handiwork. They don't create. They guide, encourage, help existing systems evolve toward greater complexity and beauty. The Lumina Eternal was practically vibrating with excitement as new understanding flowed through her consciousness. The ship's biotechnological nature made her uniquely suited to process and integrate the architect's knowledge, and Marcus could feel her capabilities expanding in real time. She's learning to see the way they see, he realized, watching as the ship's sensor displays began showing layers of reality that had been invisible before. She's becoming something new, something that can navigate between realities the way conventional ships navigate normal space. The architect who was serving as their guide projected a new set of images, showing them the broader context of what they were learning. Throughout the galaxy, other young civilizations were reaching points in their development where they would need guidance to continue evolving. The Kron with their massive engineering projects, the Psykar with their exploration of consciousness itself, dozens of other species that were approaching thresholds they couldn't cross alone. They want us to help, Marcus understood. They've been working in isolation for so long because they couldn't find younger species who were ready to understand what they were doing. But now they found us, and through us, they can reach out to others who are ready to take the next step. The knowledge sharing session continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes in normal time. When it finally concluded, Marcus felt fundamentally changed. Not just in what he knew, but in how he saw the universe itself. Reality was far stranger, far more malleable, and far more wonderful than he had ever imagined. The question now, Zara-TH said softly, is what we do with what we've learned. This knowledge could revolutionize galactic civilization, but it could also be dangerous in the wrong hands. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility they now carried. The ability to navigate between realities, to reshape the fundamental constants of physics, to commune with intelligences that existed on cosmic scales, these were capabilities that could either elevate galactic civilization to new heights or destroy it entirely if misused. We start small, he decided. We find others who are ready to understand, who can handle this kind of knowledge responsibly. Scientists, explorers, engineers who share the architect's goals of helping the universe become more than it is. The architect's vessel began moving again, leading them through more galleries of impossible beauty toward what appeared to be a nexus point where multiple realities intersected. Here, Marcus realized, they could access passages to anywhere in the galaxy, maybe even beyond. They're giving us the keys to the universe, Zara-TH said, awe evident in her voice. Access to the network they use to travel instantly between distant points, to reach civilizations that are isolated by conventional space travel. As they approached the nexus, Marcus felt the Lumina Eternal's consciousness reaching out to touch the intersection point. The ship sang with joy as she made contact with the reality-spanning network, her awareness suddenly expanding to encompass not just their local region of space, but connection points throughout the galaxy. I can see them all, the ship communicated through their shared link, her mental voice filled with wonder. Every civilization that's ready to take the next step, every species that's developed enough to handle contact with the architects. We can reach them all. Marcus studied the network connections flowing across the displays, watching as points of light indicated civilizations throughout the galaxy. Some were familiar, the major powers that dominated galactic politics and trade. But others were completely unknown, species that had developed in isolation or had been written off as primitive by the galactic community. There's a pattern, he realized, studying the distribution of contact points. The architects aren't just reaching out randomly. They're connecting civilizations that complement each other, that have different strengths and knowledge bases that can support mutual growth. A galactic community of truly advanced civilizations, Zara-TH said, understanding dawning in her expression. Not just species that have developed faster than light travel and energy weapons, but species that have learned to work with the fundamental forces of reality itself. The architect projected one final communication before beginning to withdraw, and the message was both simple and profound. The universe grows through diversity, evolves through cooperation, becomes beautiful through conscious participation in its own development. Help it grow. As the ancient entity departed, Marcus felt a sense of profound responsibility settling over him. They had been entrusted with knowledge that could reshape galactic civilization, but also with the wisdom to know how to use it properly. Where do we start? Zara-TH asked, studying the network connections that were now permanently available to the Lumina Eternal. Marcus grinned, the expression that had carried him through every impossible challenge of his career. Same way I always start. We find something that needs fixing, and we fix it. According to these network readings, there's a civilization about 30 light-years from here that's been trying to solve an energy crisis that's threatening their entire planet. Conventional physics says their problem is unsolvable, but, with what we've just learned, we might be able to help them find a solution that their own science couldn't discover, Zara-TH finished, her arms moving in patterns of excitement. A solution that demonstrates the practical applications of architect knowledge without revealing anything that could be dangerous in immature hands. The Lumina Eternal was already calculating the journey, her consciousness bright with anticipation. This was what she had been created for, what she had been waiting 3 decades to do. Not just exploration for its own sake, but exploration in service of helping the universe grow and evolve and become more than it had been before. Navigation to the HFY system, Marcus announced, settling into his hybrid control station. Let's go see if we can solve the impossible. As the ship engaged the Nexus network and reality folded around them in ways that conventional physics insisted should be impossible, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. He'd started as a technician trying to repair a broken ship. Now he was part of something that could reshape the future of galactic civilization. The journey through the reality network was instantaneous and eternal simultaneously, a passage through spaces that existed between the normal dimensions where matter and energy played by familiar rules. When they emerged into normal space around the HFY system, Marcus was amazed to discover that the Lumina Eternal had traveled a distance that would have taken conventional ships months to cover. The HFY, Zara-TH said, studying the sensor readings that showed a planet in crisis. They'd been members of the galactic community for about 200 years, known primarily for their artistic achievements and philosophical schools. But, according to these readings, their star is destabilizing in ways that threaten all life on their world. Marcus looked at the display showing a civilization facing extinction, and felt the familiar determination that had driven his entire career. Here was a problem that needed solving, a challenge that conventional science had written off as hopeless. Then, let's introduce them to some unconventional science, he said, watching as the Lumina Eternal gracefully approached the troubled system. Time to put our new knowledge to work. The ship sang around them, her consciousness bright with purpose as they prepared to attempt something that had never been done before, using architect knowledge to save an entire world. It was, Marcus reflected, exactly the kind of impossible task that humans had always specialized in. Behind them, the Nexus connection remained active, a permanent link to the network that could carry them instantly to any point in the galaxy where help was needed. They were no longer just explorers. They had become something new, bridges between realities, healers for a universe that was learning to grow beyond its current limitations. And this was just the beginning. The HFY homeworld was dying, and everyone knew it. Marcus watched the main display as the Lumina Eternal approached the planet that had been home to one of the galaxy's most renowned artistic civilizations for over 50,000 years. The world itself was beautiful, flowing cities that seemed to grow from the landscape like crystal and flowers, vast gardens that turned entire continents into living artwork, atmospheric processors that painted the sky in colors that had inspired poets throughout the galaxy. But, the star that had nurtured this beauty for millennia was failing in ways that conventional science couldn't explain or prevent. The stellar instabilities began about 50 years ago, Zara-TH explained, studying the sensor readings that showed a sun writhing with chaotic energy discharges. Solar flares that should be impossible given the star's age and mass, gravitational fluctuations that are affecting planetary orbits, and radiation patterns that are slowly poisoning the atmosphere. Marcus examined the data through his hybrid interface, noting patterns that conventional physics couldn't account for. But, with the knowledge the architects had shared, he was beginning to see what was really happening. It's not natural stellar aging, he realized. Something is drawing energy from the star's core, but it's not the controlled harvest we saw the architects performing. This is chaotic, uncontrolled, like someone is trying to tap stellar energy without understanding what they're doing. The ship's consciousness touched their minds, sharing observations that her enhanced perception was revealing. Deep within the star's core, something was indeed feeding on stellar energy, but it was a form of technology rather than a natural phenomenon. Artificial stellar parasites, Zarath said, her arms moving in patterns of distress. Someone has installed energy extraction devices that are slowly killing the star. But who would do such a thing, and why? Their answer came in the form of a transmission from the planet's surface, a desperate communication from the HFY government requesting immediate assistance from any vessel in the system. Unknown ship, this is Prime Harmonist Velandra of the HFY Concordance, came a voice that managed to sound both musical and desperate. We have detected your arrival in our system. If you have come in response to our distress calls, please know that we welcome any aid you can provide. Our world is dying, and we have exhausted every conventional solution. Marcus opened a communication channel, the ship's consciousness helping him interface with the HFY communication protocols. Prime Harmonist, this is Marcus Chen aboard the Lumina Eternal. We've detected the stellar instabilities affecting your system, and we believe we may be able to help. But we're going to need more information about how this situation developed. The response came with obvious relief and a healthy dose of hope. Captain Chen, you have no idea how welcome your words are. We have been facing this crisis for 50 years, watching our sun slowly die while our best scientists struggle to even understand what's happening. Please, join us on the surface. We will share everything we know. An hour later, Marcus and Zarath stood in what had once been the HFY's greatest observatory, a crystalline dome that offered a perfect view of their troubled star. Prime Harmonist Velandra was a graceful being who seemed to be composed of flowing energy as much as physical matter, her form shifting and adapting as her emotional state changed. The crisis began when we detected artificial structures within our star, she explained, gesturing toward displays that showed the chaotic energy patterns racking their sun. At first, we thought we had discovered evidence of natural stellar phenomena that we had never observed before. But, as the disruptions continued and intensified, we realized that something was actively harvesting our star's energy. Who installed these devices? Zarath asked, studying the technical readouts with growing concern. Velandra's form shimmered with what Marcus had learned was the HFY equivalent of a bitter laugh. We did. 50 years ago, when we were still naive enough to believe that advanced technology could solve any problem without consequences. The story that emerged was a cautionary tale about the dangers of adopting technology without fully understanding its implications. The HFY had discovered what appeared to be abandoned stellar engineering equipment in the outer regions of their system, devices that promised to provide unlimited clean energy by tapping directly into stellar fusion reactions. The technology was so advanced that our best engineers couldn't fully understand how it worked, Velandra continued. But the potential benefits were so great that we decided to install the devices anyway. For a few years, they provided exactly what was promised, unlimited energy that allowed us to expand our civilization beyond anything we had thought possible. But the devices were never meant to work with your star, Marcus realized, studying the technical specifications that showed equipment designed for completely different stellar types. They're slowly destabilizing the fusion reactions that keep your sun burning steadily. Worse than that, Zarath added, her analysis revealing the full scope of the disaster. The extraction rate is increasing exponentially. At current rates, your star will collapse into an unstable neutron state within the next 10 years. Velandra's form darkened with despair. Our scientists have reached the same conclusion. We've tried everything we can think of to shut down the devices, but they've integrated themselves so deeply into the stellar core that any attempt to remove them risks triggering an immediate collapse. Marcus felt the familiar thrill he always experienced when facing an impossible problem. Here was a challenge that conventional engineering said couldn't be solved, a situation where the obvious solutions would only make things worse. What if we don't try to remove the devices, he said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. What if we modify them instead? Modify them how? Velandra asked, hope beginning to flicker in her energy patterns. Marcus grinned, the expression that had gotten him into and out of trouble throughout his career. By using them to do what they were originally designed to do, but with a star they're actually compatible with. The plan he outlined was audacious even by human standards. Instead of trying to remove the parasitic devices from the HFY star, they would use the dimensional folding techniques the architects had taught them to connect the devices to a different stellar source, one that was naturally dying and could safely provide the energy the devices required. You want to create a permanent dimensional link between our star and the dying star in the system where you found the architects? Zara-TH said, her arms moving in patterns of amazed disbelief. That's actually brilliant. The parasitic devices would drain energy from a source that's already failing, while leaving your star to burn naturally. But, is such a thing even possible? Valandra asked, her form brightening with tentative hope. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not, Marcus admitted. But, we've learned some new tricks recently. The Lumina Eternal now has the capability to create and maintain dimensional bridges across galactic distances. The question is whether we can integrate that capability with the existing parasitic devices without destabilizing everything. The next 12 hours were the most challenging of Marcus's career. Working with technology that operated according to principles human science was still learning to understand, he and Zara-TH carefully modified the parasitic devices to accept dimensional input feeds instead of direct stellar taps. The Lumina Eternal served as both engineering platform and computational matrix, her consciousness processing calculations that would have overwhelmed any conventional computer system. The ship's biotechnological nature allowed her to interface directly with the parasitic devices, understanding their function and requirements in ways that purely mechanical systems never could. Dimensional link established, Zara-TH announced, monitoring energy flows that span impossible distances in real time. The devices are now drawing power from the dying star where we met the architects, and the drain on the Kethvar sun has dropped to 0. Marcus watched the stellar monitoring displays with satisfaction as the chaotic energy patterns that had been tearing their star apart began to stabilize. How long before we see full stabilization? At current rates, the star should return to normal fusion patterns within 6 months, the ship's consciousness communicated directly to his mind. The dimensional link is stable and self-maintaining. The parasitic devices will continue to function indefinitely without further impact on the Kethvar system. Prime Harmonist Valandra's form blazed with joy so intense that Marcus had to shade his eyes. You've saved our world, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of pure gratitude. You've given us back our future. But Marcus was already thinking beyond this immediate success. The technique they had developed here could be applied to other situations throughout the galaxy. Energy shortages, environmental disasters, technological crises that conventional science couldn't solve, all could potentially be addressed using the dimensional engineering principles they were learning to master. This is just the beginning, he told Valandra. What we've learned here can help other civilizations facing similar crises. We can share these techniques with species that are ready to use them responsibly. Over the following weeks, word of what had happened in the Kethvar system spread throughout the galactic community. Stories of a ship that could solve impossible problems, of engineers who had learned to work with the fundamental forces of reality itself, of hope in situations where conventional science offered only despair. The Lumina Eternal became something unprecedented in galactic history, a vessel that traveled not just to explore, but to heal, to help, to bridge the gap between species that had thought themselves isolated by the limitations of conventional technology. Marcus found himself at the center of a growing network of beings who were ready to accept that the universe was far stranger and more malleable than they had ever imagined. Scientists who were willing to expand their understanding of physics, engineers who were ready to work with technologies that challenged every assumption they had ever made, explorers who wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible. We become something new, Zara-TH observed as they prepared to respond to yet another call for help, this time from a species facing a quantum plague that was unraveling the molecular structure of their homeworld. We're not just technicians or engineers anymore. We're healers for a universe that's learning to transcend its current limitations. Marcus nodded, watching as the ship prepared to engage the dimensional network that would carry them instantly to wherever they were needed. And this is still just the beginning. There are thousands of civilizations out there facing challenges that conventional science can't solve. But, with what we've learned, with what the ship has become, we can help them find solutions they never thought possible. The Lumina Eternal sang around them, her consciousness bright with purpose as she prepared to traverse the impossible distances between crisis and solution, between despair and hope. She had awakened not just to fly again, but to fulfill her true purpose as a bridge between what was and what could be. As they vanished into the dimensional network, traveling instantly toward their next impossible challenge, Marcus reflected on how far they had come. A broken ship, a stubborn technician, and an alien engineer had somehow become catalysts for a transformation that was reshaping galactic civilization itself. And, in the depths of space, in regions where reality was more fluid than most beings ever suspected, the architects watched and approved. The universe was learning to grow, to evolve, to become something more beautiful than it had ever been before. And, at the heart of that transformation was a simple human principle that had been proven true once again: everything can be fixed if you're willing to try hard enough and think differently enough about the problem. The galaxy was about to discover just how far that principle could take them.